Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Pearcey Foundation Australia 4.0 discussion series. My name is Wayne Fitzsimmons, and I'm the current chairman of the Pearcey Foundation in Australia, one of Australia's most prestigious technology-based foundations, the home of the Pearcey Innovation Medal and the Pearcey Oration. The Pearcey Foundation acknowledges the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people with us today, their elders past, present and emerging, as well as the traditional custodians who belong to the lands where the Pearcey Foundation and you, our guests, meet, live and work. Together, we are Australia. Australia 4 is an initiative of the Foundation designed to promote open cross-industry discussions that provide insights into the challenges and opportunities we all will meet as we make our transition from our current electricity system towards a net zero emissions and distributed energy resources. I would also like to take a moment to note our upcoming October the 30th event in Sydney, where we will be holding our Australia 4.0 Summit to consolidate the insights and learnings from these sessions and establish recommendations on how the Australian 4.0 energy and ICT collaborators can contribute as a nation going forward. We would like to acknowledge our current sponsors, the ACS, University of Melbourne, Monash University and the University of New South Wales. Without their support, these sessions would not happen. We greatly appreciate their support, along with that of all of our speakers and moderators, as well as the organisations with which they are involved. Please note that this session is being recorded and will be published in a few days on our Pearcey YouTube channel. The first 3 recordings are currently available, of course. For now, it is my great pleasure to hand over to today's moderator, Jennifer George. Like all of our speakers today, Jennifer's full bio's on the website, but importantly, Jennifer is currently my co-chair of Australian 4.0 Committee, along with Colin Farrelly, who makes the 3 of us. She is leader of the Nakadu Deep Tech Innovator Network, the CEO of Strategic Commercialisation Australia, an entity which specialises in commercialising deep tech innovations, and is currently the chair of IT 268 Smart Cities and Communities for Standards Australia. Jennifer.
Good morning, everyone. It's nice to see you. And welcome. Thank you, Wayne, for the introduction. As Wayne just said, I commercialise highly complex technology, a lot of it in the engineering space. And to accomplish this, I typically ask 3 questions. Firstly, is an innovation technically and financially viable? Secondly, is it commercially feasible? Can everything be pulled together to make it work? And finally, the third question is it really answering, are we solving the problem that needs to be solved here? Because we have to look at all of the different parts before we can give that judgment. I think what we're doing today, or what we're doing through this whole series, is bringing the challenges of commercial viability and commercial feasibility to the fore and saying, how does everything work together? How are we going to do that? And within the lens of, are we solving a problem? The problem we need to solve here is reducing CO2 and minimizing the effects of climate change. It's not just building tech, it's about solving the problem. So what we're bringing together today is a group of 3 speakers who are going to look at risk reduction, readiness, response, and recovery. And we're going to look at those 4 factors through 3 different specific lenses: the lens of the climate scientists, the operations lens, and then the big picture critical infrastructure lens. So trying to give these different points of view that flesh out the challenges that will help us commercialize the entire electricity grid. So in the audience, I invite you to think about that. As we're kind of forming questions and you're putting them in the chat, make sure that you're considering how can we make this technically viable? How can we make it, have we looked at how things work together? And is there opportunity for ICT to really start to fill those gaps and to be able to create the connecting pieces that make this all possible? So the three speakers that we're presenting here today will be Jill Caney, the chief recognized as a climate scientist and the CEO of Earn Energy. The operational risk expert will be industry consultant and principal Alex Bache, and then we're going to work with, then Suya Nepal from CSIRO is going to take us through the last part. Right. So Jill, I read on your when I was researching you, I read an inspiration, and you need to see the entire 30-year journey of this person before to really get the full impact of what this incredible person has done. So I'm so pleased to have you on the panel today. Jill is the MBE and former CEO and founder and CEO of Earn Energy. She has worked in the industry for over 30 years. She has practical experience in the weather industry, and including a stint in Cape Grim, where she ran the station there. Expertise in fire mitigation, community outreach, and she has her own company, of course, for the last 10 years in Earn Energy. So welcome, and let's hear from you today, Jill.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Of course.
Okay, is that shared okay?
Yep.
Beautiful. All right, I'm going to give you a brief overview of how climate has changed already, likely future changes, and then the impact of those changes on the electricity network, and how in a world where we're going to be increasingly dependent on electricity, resilience is a critical thing that we need to consider. All right, so this first slide, I'm going to start at the top left, which is how our rainfall has changed since records began.
No slide here.
No slide here. All right.
I can see it. It's not a problem.
I can see it too.
We can see
So
it.
you should be able to see maps of Australia, all sorts of orange. Is that correct?
Yep.
All right, so I'm starting in the top left, and an orange color means a reduction in rain, and a blue color means an increase in rain. And as you can see, that in the southwest of Australia and southeast of Australia, rainfall has decreased, particularly winter rainfall. So it's decreased 15% in southwest Australia and 10% in southeast Australia. Our air temperature since records began in 1910 has gone up by 1.5 degrees. And then if we move to the top right, map of Australia, this is the number of fire days, the increase in fire days, with deep red meaning increase of 25 days, and blue, an increase of 25 days, and blue, a decrease of 25 days. So we now have approximately 3 to 4 weeks more fire days since the 1950s. And that means it's more challenging to manage fire. And we're obviously seeing a lot of fires internationally at the moment. And we send our firefighters globally to help, and they come to us. But as everybody's fire season extends, that becomes increasingly hard to do. And the little chart in the middle shows extreme heat days. And since records began, those have increased by 43 days. Now, I know most of you probably think that extreme heat is probably something like 42 degrees. That's really hot, but actually accident and emergency and mortality increases when temperature gets over 23 degrees C, which for most of us seems like a pleasant day. And one of the link, if you like, with electricity is that you're 77% less likely to die on an extreme heat day if you have working air conditioning at home. And extreme heat is Australia's biggest killer. A few other quick things that have changed. Tropical cyclones have decreased by 22%. However, the tropical cyclones that we do have tend to be more intense because there's more energy in the atmosphere. And you will have probably seen that 2023 is shaping up to be a bit of an anomalous year with high temperatures, lots of bushfires and low ice minima at the poles, North Pole and the South Pole, and on the mountains. And this could be a tipping point as our climate changes, or it could be the result of the eruption of the Tongan volcano, which put a lot of water vapor into the stratosphere and may have accelerated or is giving us this unusual year. It's very similar to what happened in 1991 when Pinatubo erupted, but that put lots of aerosol into the stratosphere and was a cooling effect rather than the heating effect that we could be seeing from the Tongan volcano. So it will be interesting to see how 2023 shapes up. So this next slide is exploring predicted future changes. And by the way, all this data is taken from the Bureau of Meteorology's and CSIRO's State of the Climate 2022, a great report if you're looking for how things have gone and where things might go. And the numbers that I'm going to talk to here are from the IPCC Assessment Report 6, which was published in March 2022. So I've said that temperature has already increased by 1.5 degrees, and we're looking at, by 2030, a further increase of 0.5 to 1.5 degrees, which means a total increase of between 2 degrees or 3 degrees C. And I'll come to why that might matter. We're looking at reduction in routine general rain, so more droughts, but an increase in extreme heavy rain. So that's going to be 20% more likely for extreme rain, and further decreases of around 10 to 15% of rainfall in Australia. Fire danger days are likely to increase to 33 days versus 25 days. And be 30% more in 2050. So this means a much longer fire season. In terms of extreme heat, we currently have 43 additional days of extreme heat. At 2 degrees C, we would expect that to double. However, if we get to 3 degrees C, that means they'll be 4 times more likely. So that's 173 additional days of extreme heat. That's over 6 months of extreme heat events, which will be a challenge to manage. If you look at the pie chart in the top right, this is one of my favorite pie charts. This is from the Australian Energy Market Commission. It looks at the causes of blackouts, and 96% of blackouts are the result of damage to the electricity distribution network. That's the network that you and I are connected to. And the plot below, with all the light blue color, shows that the majority of outages are the result of bad weather. So that pale blue color, whether they're small outages, up to 50,000 people, up to over 250,000 people on the left there. It's all about weather. So now we get to what does weather do to electricity networks? So I've got some sad pictures of electricity networks here. So in the top left, we have a picture of a 500 kV transmission tower in Pearcey in Victoria. This was one of 6 that collapsed in January 2020, cutting Victoria and indeed the rest of the East Coast off from South Australia. It was the result of what we call severe convective winds, or downforce winds. These are really hard to predict because they're a small weather system. They're not a large storm. So we lost connection in January. 3 weeks later, we had a single temporary line courtesy of all of Australia's transmission companies and the New Zealand transmission companies, who provided their spares to get the connection back up. And by the 3rd of March, we had a double temporary line installed. And it took till October 2020 to have the completely repaired line back up. And that cost us $25 million. That cost $25 million, and that goes to Victorian customers. The bottom left is a distribution outage, which was in June 2021. This was an East Coast low, one of our most intense systems that we experience in Southeast Australia. Again, AusNet distribution. This is in the Dandenong Mountains. While most customers were reconnected within days, there were some customers that suffered an outage of 3 months. And the problem here was that there were big eucalypts that just fell over and crushed the distribution network. And that outage had a repair bill of $39 million. Again, that will go to Victorian customers. And on the top right, we have data from the Insurance Council of Australia, which keep the most comprehensive records of insured losses for catastrophic events. I say insured because it doesn't cover uninsured losses, which will be considerably more. And as you can see, the costs of the events have been increasing with time. The blue line is an El Nino year, so a wetter year, and a yellow line is a La Nina year is the blue line, and an El Nino year is the yellow line. And we'll have to wait and see with a pending El Nino what 2023, 2024 will bring. All right, now I want to explore the dependencies of electricity and other critical infrastructure, because we're talking here about ICT and comms. This is a diagram that shows the complex web of infrastructure, and electricity sits in the middle like the spider. And while this doesn't talk about ICT, you can assume that all the arrows are ICT. And you can see the interdependencies, and the Royal Commission into the National Natural Disaster Arrangements following the 2019-2020 fires was critical of the telecoms industry and its inability to keep its assets up. The electricity networks work cooperatively together when there's an outage to support each other to repair, but because telecoms are competitive industries, they don't necessarily work together. And you need telecoms in a fire to know where the fire front is, and you also need telecoms in order to get to know that it's safe to repair electricity and telecoms towers. The picture on the bottom left is the evacuation from Malakuta. The military did attempt to improve communications in Malakuta during the fire. They dropped sat phones, but nobody knew how to use those satellite phones, so they couldn't make things better. And what I want to highlight here is, as we electrify, as our transportation becomes more electrified, managing our batteries to ensure that if we need to evacuate, we can, or that we can keep our water pumps going to fight fires, is going to become increasingly complex. And so when we talk about resilience, it's about all of us working together to deliver an entirely resilient system. So as Jennifer has said, you start with risk reduction before any event. When you know an event is coming, you want to be ready. Then after an event, you respond, and then you have recovery. And it's a continuous process. You have to learn from past events, not just your own past event, but other people's past events, in order not necessarily to build back better, but to build back different to deliver resilience. And one thing we tend to focus on in Australia is response and recovery. That's where we put all our investment dollars. However, it's very clear from the UN and other work that spending $1 on risk reduction saves you $2 to $10, depending on the industry sector, on response and recovery costs. So we need to do better. And because of these dependencies. We have to work together to reduce the risk and develop resilience. It's about households, communities, local government authorities, state governments and federal governments, and infrastructure providers all working together to get it all lined up. And that's it.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you so much, Jill. The numbers you're talking about there were astounding, and to think that we're building the grid into this kind of changing, complex situation really only exacerbates the amount of operational challenges that we're going to have, and how everybody needs to work together. Even just what you talked about, the telcos, understanding that how we need to communicate in these stressful times. We need to have people building systems that talk together and work together. So thank you so much for that. And I hope everybody in the audience is thinking about questions. It's not often you get to talk to a climate scientist about what's going on in the world. This is a really unique opportunity. So if you've got questions, add them to the chat and we will be covering them at the end of the session. Our next speaker is Alex Bates, Principal of Electrical Engineering at BES. His focus is on operations, innovations, standards, and ideas. He looks at a wide range of interoperability, and he's got a lot to say. And obviously, it's within this area of risk reduction, the readiness, response, and recovery, the total resilience. So when I asked Wayne about, what should I say? How can I say a bit more about Alex? He just said, that's easy. He's one of the most respected electrical engineers in the business. So need I say more? He is awesome. So with this, ladies and gentlemen, please let me introduce Alex Bates.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Jennifer. And it's my pleasure. I'll try and share the screen and take us through this journey. Can you see that?
Yes.
Very good. Okay, well, thank you for the opportunity to speak and for your kind words. My focus today is on the electricity distribution system design and implementation issues, and some of the challenges that I think we face. So I'll see if I can talk about this. We just heard from Jill about the challenges that we face as a result of climate change. But the key issue is to keep the lights on during the various situations faced at the distribution level. And it's not only the climate change effects that are a threat to our operation. Electricity distribution network operators face quite a large number of challenges to keep these lights on. As Jill said, the objectives are to risk reduction, readiness, response, and recovery. It is at the medium voltage and low voltage levels that the greatest challenges are presented. All of this environment where the industry is undergoing fundamental change in the transition to renewable energy. At the same time, we're facing the increased call to go all electric, which will transfer demand on the network with the increasing trend to move to electric transportation. The transformation presents further challenges faced in coping with new technologies and development of suitable, consistent standards to allow for the orderly development. Whereas at the high voltage, the number of lines and components is relatively small, at the distribution level, you're dealing with individual households and premises, and so dealing with large millions of customers and many millions of components. There is no doubt that AI will play a significant part in the future in assisting this transition. However, there are real hardware issues that need to be addressed. All of this is an environment where climate extremes need to be managed. So some of the challenges, apart from responding to climate extremes, are quite a number of issues, such as, for example, electrical safety is a significant challenge. It's no longer possible to assume that isolating supply at the supply transformer will ensure electrical isolation. Each household and commercial industrial premise is now potentially a generator, and there is a risk that the supply coming out of the installation is energised. So knowing where the potential source of supply is important, and having adequate procedures in place is important. This can be achieved by being able to adequately isolate all the suppliers, or possibly use different working techniques such as live line working. The combination of batteries and grid forming inverters means that the customer installation can be producing power and export into the network. So clearly safety issues need to be considered. Grid forming inverters are used in microgrids where they can completely disconnect from the electricity grid and generate in an island mode. When supply is restored, or when the microgrid wants to reconnect, there's a need to resynchronize with the network on reconnection. With a complex network, this can present some interesting network challenges. And of course, the distribution operator needs to have a visibility of the network. The issues such as the loading on the network, the voltage conditions on the network, and managing them all need to be handled. And the configuration of the network, more or less in real time, needs to be able to be achieved. This is hard enough at the 11 kV and 22 kV voltage levels, but at the low voltage level, it presents significant challenges. There are further challenges here. Just some of the issues that need to be dealt with as the real transformation of the network is underway. Each of the topics is a subject for considerable discussion, and I don't have the time to deal with them in this presentation, but I'm just say that many of these challenges relate to issues that I've listed here. Let's just talk about regulatory issues. With the transformation of the electricity supply industry from the vertically integrated system into its various parts, costs and benefits sit in different camps. Added to that, the regulatory overheads that utilities have to deal with are expensive and time-consuming. This is well illustrated in the area of metering data, where the introduction of competition in the regulatory framework has introduced costs and failure to realise potential value and customer outcomes. Let's talk about the technology transformation. Data systems, automation, communication are key requirements to smarten the network beyond the zone substation at the distribution voltage level of 11 kV and 22 kV and so forth, and at the low voltage level. There are huge training requirements to transition or enhance the skills of the workforce to be able to cope and implement the technologies. Developing and having an adequate workforce with the skills necessary to be able to cope with the technology transformation will enable the electricity distribution network operator to operate a smart grid. Suppliers to the industry need to be actively part of the knowledge transfer process to ensure that the training delivered is relevant and can be applied in practice. The further challenge is that innovation always occurs well before standardisation. As a result, there is the increasing risk that the future technologies that are implemented are incompatible, and this results in orphaned legacy systems. So working closely with manufacturers and suppliers at the standardisation level early in the phase of new developments reduces that risk. However, the competitive commercial environment, getting that sort of cooperation from manufacturers is often difficult. And in terms of technical issues, well, I've just listed just a few here, and some of these I'll deal with in more detail in the coming slides. Now, development of what we refer to as the digital twin of the distribution network is a significant challenge, but an important one. Traditionally, the electricity distribution network has been on the basis of fit and forget. That is, the hardware is installed and essentially is a dumb network, and the network records were not necessarily spatially correct. Graphical information systems have been rolled out where the maps have been transformed into digital records, and so inherently they have a representation of the actual installations. But network connectivity was not the key factor in the transformation of those records. Now the GIS needs to be correct to undertake network studies down to the low voltage level. To a large extent, distribution utilities relied on monitoring of the network at the zone substation with their SCADA systems that are in place, and to exercise monitoring at the feeder level. This has been supplemented by customer feedback in terms of reporting low or high volts or outages. In the past, distribution systems only had maximum demand indicators where the distribution transformer was MDIs were manually read and the data occasionally captured. However, to be able to properly manage the low voltage network, greater real-time visibility is required. The digital transformation of the distribution system has now been underway for some time, but then the number of components involved makes the digital transformation process to be challenging. Now here I've got a diagrammatic, simplistic representation of the real network, basically to the extent that it covers a single customer, but there are millions of them. And on the top, we've got the real network, and on the bottom, the digital twin. The real network needs to have interaction with the digital twin, which provides the capability to reflect the state of the network. This diagram demonstrates that there are many interfaces between the real network and the digital twin. The interaction is with measurement, such as smart meters, and control units that initiate actions on the real network and can actively interact. All of these interfaces represent a potential cybersecurity threat, which no doubt we'll hear more about later. So there are many programs underway that distribution network operators are exploring the way forward in making the future grid operational in the way to achieve its objectives. There are many programs that are being implemented both in real terms and trials are underway. The common theme is better data management. Programs such as advanced LV planning and state estimation to capture data engineering to achieve real visibility of the network, how to operate with community batteries, with grid batteries, storage and sharing of the assets, how to operate a distribution energy management system and the software required to coordinate distributed energy resources, operation of the dynamic operating envelope, allocation of hosting, which involves allocation of hosting capacity optimally on the network. Hard enough at the 11 kV level, but certainly challenging at the low voltage level. And so there's programs such as dynamic voltage measurement management to adjust zone substation voltages to operate dynamically, and so forth. So there's many trials underway, and I won't go through them all. So advanced distribution management systems are required. The typical architecture of integrated advanced distribution management system is shown here, where it consists of the interfacing with the real-time system and the organization's enterprise support network, and some of the elements of the system are the SCADA system, the distribution management system, the outage management system, workforce management, the mobile data, and visual reporting, all of which is integrated in a coherent integrated system to allow that visibility. But what it actually points to is that there's a need for low voltage distribution management systems to be in place to do things more locally at the distribution level, separate to the SCADA system, separate to the 11 kV network, and being able to work out how to manage the controls and the interfaces to the DMS and the amount of data that actually is being captured in that process. So these control systems are still a work in progress in terms of understanding exactly how this is all going to fit together and work. I spoke about the implementation of the dynamic operating envelope, and the left is the actual typical dynamic operating envelope, and on the right-hand side is just a representation of the approach that may be used in communications to the devices and to the central controller to capture the data and manage manage that data, and we see that we've uses the IEEE 2030.5 protocol. And finally, the IEEE 2030.5 implementation through the implementation of the CCPOS protocol, with Standard Australia's worked in producing a handbook that transforms that protocol into ability to communicate with the inverters in Australia, is part of that development process. So many challenges are ahead of us, and this was just a snapshot of the sorts of challenges that I think that we face. Over to you, Jenny.
Thank you so much. Wow, the complexity we're talking about here and the opportunity. So in commercialization, every challenge is a terrific opportunity for us to build something that is brand new, that will link all of these different technologies together, that will solve the actual problems. So I can see here that from your presentation, Alex, that although we have a number of pieces of this puzzle, we also have a number of opportunities for people to ask questions and develop new solutions. So the final part of what we're presenting today is going to be around cybersecurity. So the weather, the operations, the critical infrastructure, how do we put all that together? And that's how we have to solve problems. So if you're thinking of a question in your mind, please put it into the chat so that we have the ongoing discussion. This is a unique opportunity for you to talk directly to some of the best talent in this industry. So I hope that you'll take this opportunity to ask some questions. Our final speaker is really going to talk about the challenges that the distributed resources offer us, but from the idea of critical infrastructure, how we can pull this all together in a secure way. So the final speaker will be Dr. Suya Nepal, he's the senior principal research scientist at CSIRO, our prestigious institution in Australia, and the mission lead for critical infrastructure protection resilience mission. Wow. Cybersecurity and quantum are trending. So let's talk about what he does. But remember, think about questions. These are great people for you to get a chance to talk to. Suya, over to you.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine.
Can you see my slide?
Yes, I can see your slides.
Okay. Too. Thank you, Jennifer, for the nice introduction. And also thank you for Pearcey Foundation for giving an opportunity to talk on the very important area and the critical area. So I just wanted to let everyone in the call know that the CSIRO is going through the mission-oriented innovation, and they realized that critical infrastructure is one of them, a very important area, and energy sector is even more important within the critical infrastructure, as previous speaker has said. So we have set up this mission, critical infrastructure protection and resilience, and this is the mission in development. And I am leading that particular mission. So let me go through some of the things that I'm going to talk today. First, let me highlight the things is like the CSIRO regularly publishes the mega trends. And if you have not looked at those mega trends, I suggest you go and look at in the CSIRO website, you will find the mega trends. And in their recent mega trend publications, there are 3 areas that are very relevant to the things today we are talking about. One is the leaner, cleaner, and greener. So the idea there is like how do we achieve the net zero by 2050? And the second one is adapting to the changing climate, and the energy sector being one of the critical infrastructure supporting people's livelihood that need to be protected from the impact of climate change, like flood, fire, extreme heats, and Jill has covered a lot of those areas already. So that's very critical. And the third aspect of it is diving into digital. And there has been growing adoption of digital and data technology. That's one of the focus of this particular things, particular session, and we have seen that there is going to be a massive scale of adoption of the ICT into the energy sector, right? So these three mega trends are responsible for starting the massive transformation in the energy sector, and the energy sector is going through the rapid transition due to the climate change, change. And we have seen a lot of like batteries and community batteries, electric vehicles coming through, right? So the big challenge for us through this particular slide to take is like, how do you ensure that there is a protection and resilience of the energy sector while we are going through this massive transformation and transition? So one of the things, as you have noticed in the previous and probably highlighted by the previous speakers, the energy sector is becoming highly distributed and complex. And we have also seen the paradigms, we have seen the paradigm shift. So from the few producers and millions of consumers, we are now moving to the millions of producers and millions of consumers, right? So we call it the prosumers. So that paradigm shift is caused by the solar panels, wind farms, batteries, electric vehicle, and they're very highly distributed. And now this massive scale of distributed energy resources becomes a reality. This gives a kind of like instead of having a physical power station, now you are looking at the virtual power stations, and not one, and the many virtual power stations. This complex network and power station rely on the digital technology to operate, and many of those complex and sophisticated networks are managed and operated using digital technology like AI. And we previous speakers talk about the automations, AI-enabled technologies are there. So going from the Internet of Energy, we are looking at the intelligent Internet of Energy. That's what the kind of like the way the energy sector is going. And if you look at all these complex systems and the networks, the challenge is like, how do you ensure confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the energy data for continuous operation of energy grid, right? There was a question pop up in the chat about how do you share the data? And that's the kind of, you want to share the data, then you need to make sure that there is a confidentiality, integrity, and availability of those data. And that's the challenge we need to solve. Also, energy is the kind of, if you have seen the slide from in one of the previous speaker slide, energy is kind of like at the center, and all of the critical infrastructures are dependent on the energy, right? So energy is what we call is like the critical of critical infrastructure, and many other critical infrastructure like health, transport, telecommunication depend on the energy. Due to the Internet of Energy, also the energy sector depends on the telecommunications. If you want, we are more relying on the energy sector and the telecom. And now there is a circular dependency, right? So the energy is depending on the telecom, and telecom is depending on the energy. So that kind of like a circular dependency also need to be understand and clearly identify where are the gaps and where are the challenges that need to be addressed. There is an added benefit of addressing the security and resiliency of critical infrastructure like the energy. The reason is that once we uplift the resiliency of energy, we can uplift the resiliency of many other critical infrastructures. So the question is now, how we have a better understanding of the interdependency between the critical infrastructure and risks brought by the different kind of hazards, right? So the remaining part, which we have not understood fully, is what are the full interdependency of those critical infrastructure, whether the SCADA systems and all the communication system, but we don't have a full understanding at the moment. So when we talk about the hazards, there are kind of three types of hazards. Everybody talk about it, and the climate we already saw Jill talk about the climate hazards, and I'm currently talking about the cyber hazards. Then on top of that, there is a supply chain hazards, right? So when we talk about supply chain, we are talking about the physical supply chain, which is like the logistics supply chain, moving materials from one place to the another place, but also there's a digital supply chain. In the digital supply chain, we are talking about the two aspects of the supply chain. One is the software supply chain, and another one is the digital infrastructure supporting the supply chain. So if you look at the kind of energy transformation. Now, energy sector is going through the massive transformation, and we are relying on more on the software. But we don't know exactly whether we can trust the software or not. We don't have any software bill of materials for the software that is being used in the energy sectors. We need to find a way that how we can ensure that the software that is being used in the energy sector are highly reliable and highly assured, right? So that's the kind of where the challenges remains. So also there is a kind of interplay between the multiple hazards. I know in the climate there is already, we have seen a lot of interplay, but there is an interplay with the cyber and supply chain. There is an interplay between the cyber and climate also. Sometimes when the massive climate event is happening, then at the same time the cyber event could occur, right? So there is kind of like the interplay happening, and that's the reality at the moment. So if you look at the interdependency and interplay between the different sectors, the question is like, how do you understand this interplay and interdependency between the different hazards or risks and then the critical infrastructure in the context of the energy sector? That's the challenge we need to look at. And when we talk about the hazards, all the time we are talking about the hazards bring by the climate, cyber, and supply chain. They are the known hazards. But then we are trying to use the critical technology to solve those hazards, like we are using the critical technology like the artificial intelligence, quantum, 6G, blockchain, and these all technologies we are using it. But these technologies are double-edged swords. They do solve some problems, but also they do bring some interesting new challenges and threats. Right? And the thing is like they introduce the new vulnerability. Let's take the example of the AI. And in AI, there are like we can do the data poisoning, we can do the backdoor attacks. And what happens if those data poisoning and backdoor attack happens? Because any prediction you are doing in the energy sector for forecasting purpose, that prediction is going to be not effective, or it's kind of wrong prediction, you'll get it, right? And another example is the quantum. Like you know that quantum is, if the quantum computer is available, the current security infrastructure is no longer secure, right? No longer valid. A lot of public infrastructures that we are using in the energy sector is not going to be secure. So how do we make sure that we transition, while we are transitioning from energy sector to the renewable energy sector, also how we make sure that we are transitioning in the secure way, so that we have the quantum safe energy sector. That's what we want to have it. And even now, the quantum computer is not available, but the people can store the data that is being transferred in our current communication and then decrypt it when the quantum computer is available. So there is a store now, decrypt later attack is still even possible now, even the quantum computer is not available. So the challenge for us is like how do you use the critical technology, modernizing energy without introducing new threats and vulnerabilities. So when we are doing the digital transformation, make sure that we are not introducing new vulnerabilities and new threats. So now the idea is like, okay, we need to build the resiliency, and the resiliency has to be built into the systems when you are going through the transformations. The built-in resiliency is only possible if you have a relevant standards to support it, right? So that's what I think that Alex talked about, the standards. We need to have the security and privacy by design in the standards themselves, right? So like, for example, we are talking about the DR 2030.5. We need to build the security and privacy built in those standards, so that the energy grids that is designed with those standards are secure and secure and private. And also security and privacy is considered as a first-class citizen, not like an afterthought, which is basically exactly what is happening in a lot of cybersecurity problems now. The standards alone are not enough, and we need to look at the corresponding appropriate and right policies and regulations, which Alex also covered about it. And also we can't ignore the science and technology. So we need to look at the science and technology. So currently what is happening is like we are looking at the standards, science and technology, and policy and regulation in isolation. And the challenge for us is like how to have a better understanding of the nexus between them, and also coordinate the activities across government and industry and R&D organizations. So kind of like looking at those standards, regulation, and science and technology, bringing the government, industry, and R&D, research and innovation ecosystem together to address this and build this future-proof grid is where we need to move forward. As when we talk about the risk all the time, I think we had a lot of conversation with the different stakeholders. Everybody talks about the digital twin, and I think Alex gave a very nice picture of the digital twin, and we can use the digital twin to understand the risk. Right. One of the things that the digital twin provides is the real-time situation awareness. So we have a common operating picture of the whole electricity grid, and or the particular part of the electricity grid, so that we can take the appropriate action and also simulate a lot of events. A digital twin connected with the physical environment, that's where we can get the maximum input. I think there was one question about the real time, and that's where I think the digital twin is going to give you the real time if the digital twin is connected with the physical twin and get the real time feed. And also there is not going to be a single digital twin. There's going to be a multiple digital twin. And these digital twins need to interact with each other to understand the interconnectivity and interplay, right? And interdependencies. So how do you build the trusted interconnected digital twin? That itself is a big problem. And also digital twin brings with is a digital double-edged sword, because you can do the digital twin to simulate a lot of cyber attacks and prevent those attacks or risk management, everything. But at the same time, if your adversaries get access to your digital twin, they can simulate those attacks in the digital twin and then perform those attacks in the real environment, right? So it's kind of like you need to protect the digital twin also. Security of digital twin is also the area we need to think about it when we talk about the digital twin. So I'm just going to give a couple of examples. At the moment, cyber attacks on energy is on the rise. For example, there was a 45 cybersecurity incidents reported in the recent report from 2017 to 2022, and 13 of them have taken place from the July only. So it's kind of like more and more attacks is happening in the energy sectors. And one good example is the Triton virus attack in the Saudi petrochemical plant in 2017, and it shut down the whole plant, right? And also we need to talk about the interdependency, that there is an interdependency is very visible in the cyber attacks also. Russian cyber attacks on the Ukrainian satellite communication network knocked out the remote monitoring of the 5,800 wind turbines in Germany's Innerkorn, and they shut them down. Like that's kind of like an attack in one country in a communication has an impact on the other country in the energy sector. So that's the kind of how interdependency and interdependent are these critical sectors are. So also I'm going to give you this is one of the my final slide. I'm taking a very specific example to highlight the interdependency here. This is not the cyber attack. This is a physical attacks, and this attack happened in the December 5, 2022 in the North Carolina substations. Two substations were fired in such a way that it has a maximum impact. The people, it was kind of like the insider attack in a way, because people know exactly how the substation works, and they fired the gun on those two substations so that it comes to completely black out whole community. And it has the impact on the schools. Schools were closed. It had medicine and hospitals, medical supply were short supply. There was a water supply problem, and there's the impact on the groceries, food supply, and the cell phone tower was stopped working. And one of the things, basically, this kind of attacks also has a very different impact on the different community. Like the rural community has a huge impact compared to the people in the urban community. The reason is that one of the things is like there are not enough human resources to fix in the regional community. So one of the critical question we need to address if you are going through this digital transformation is we need to ensure that human resources supply chain is also adequate. We need to have the skilled manpower and in this area so that we have the continuous supply of the human resources. So with that, I'm going to leave the final message is that yes, AI is the really good things. AI is going to give you a lot of prediction, and it will do a lot of modeling of the risk, everything. But we should not rely fully on the AI. We need to look at how AI and human can work together in this environment, so that we can get the maximum benefit of both of them. So the automation with the human interaction is the way to go. With that, I will stop my talk. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I thought, I hope you're in agreement with me that there's really interesting perspectives brought to light here by having the three speakers, the three different perspectives of what's needed, what's happening, and how we can turn challenges into opportunities by developing new solutions. Innovation has to come along with standards, as Alex said, and we need to make sure it's cyber secure, as Dr. Nepal said. So we have a number of questions. If you also have questions that you'd like to add to the chat, please add them now. I think we'll get to the point where we might run out of time if we don't address these questions straight away. So I'm going to start with a question for Suya, and that is about following on with your discussion, is in the event of a cybersecurity incident on a control system, how do you envisage the network as a whole to keep operating? Is there redundancy? And that question is from Nathan Seal. Can you elaborate on that, Suya?
I think one of the things is like redundancy is one of the way to make the high availability. But I think the idea here is like, how do you make sure that your critical part of the infrastructure is highly protected, right? That the protection is I would say protection is the first principle, right? You protect it. And if in case the protection doesn't work, and inevitably there is a cyber attacks, then it is a resiliency. That's what we go to the resiliency mechanism. In the resiliency mechanism, there are many different ways of doing the resiliency, and kind of like having the duplications or redundancy is one of the mechanisms. But the other mechanism of the resiliency is like making this network system so that you understand the full risk, so that there is kind of like none of the component is a critical component, right? So that there is a kind of like the isolation. You do the isolation also. So the network is segmented, isolated, and you can have a zero trust network. So you can do a lot of new resiliency mechanism that is coming up in the technology. You can apply those things. But what my worry is that because we are not considering all those new principles and technologies while we are designing or we are transforming the new things. So there is no built-in resiliency. And resiliency is also afterthought, right? Once the incident happened, then people started saying, oh, now we need to think about it, right? But I think the good idea is to build that resiliency right from the designing phase while we are transforming to the transforming energy to the renewable energy. Let's make the resiliency as a built-in feature, right? So that's the kind of where we need to think about.
Absolutely. And I mean, we really do have a rare opportunity here, rebuilding the entire infrastructure. So why come from an idea that's maybe 50 years old that we had to overlay all of the systems on top of it? Let's build it from the beginning. Let's make security the backbone of what we're doing. There's a question from Rajaratnam about, also to you, Suya. I'm just going to stop from kind of switching around from one person to the next. Just stick with you for a minute. And do you see any role for blockchain in all of this?
Yes, I think blockchain has a role in this one. I will say that if your critical data is, if you want to make that critical data highly available, and blockchain is kind of like one of the things that is probably provide the trusted platform for you to provide that critical data. But I think it is yet to be proven. So I will not say that it is that, but there is a way of, there is a potential use of blockchain in particular application. But I think blockchain has a lot of hype than the reality. But having said that, in certain cases, the blockchain are really useful, and we need to find that that particularly what kind of data set is critical for our to make sure that our sector is operational, right? If that critical data set we want to make highly available, then blockchain could be one of the technology that could be useful.
Excellent. Thank you. It is a challenge measuring and optimizing what's in the market. Alex, I've got a couple of questions around data and blockchain and digital twins. And there's a question about, you know, do we really need to spend all this money on digital twins? And when it is really, haven't we got enough data already? And could we deal with toning down or dialing down the data? And can we do what we're trying to achieve here with that as an option?
Oh, look, there's no doubt that artificial intelligence is able to interpret limited data into a transformative way to give a pretty good understanding of the status. So that is certainly a tool that is available. It's still a representation, and it's the actual speed of capturing that data is a sort of particular issue. You also have to need to remember that there are various time domains where the speed of data is critical or not critical. In areas where you're doing some local control, where you've actually got to manage the actual the network in terms of its generation and fluctuation of generation, that has to happen more locally. But in a sort of a global sense, data can be interpreted, and AI could play a role. So it's a combination. It's no magic bullet, but there is a place for, certainly there's a place for using sparse data and interpreting the availability of that sparse data into a real system and interfacing it. But you still need to, at the end of the day, manage the control of the network and manage the devices and have the communication devices in the appropriate place to do that. I guess the other challenge that this whole area is faced is that each utility is developing its own systems. So there's disparate data sets that are being developed, and not all data is available to the distributor. You know, this whole area of metering data, it's not open. It's not available to the distributor. They've actually got to purchase that and make the arrangements to get it. And there's, as has been mentioned, there's privacy issues that have been raised rather than being open. So there are significant issues in terms of separating those areas. But yeah, I mean, the use of artificial intelligence certainly is going to be a great tool, but you've still got to actually have a basis on which you're going to interpret the data.
I think so. You mentioned that it's you know, this is going to ultimately be a people business. So people and wisdom might need to work together here, not just data. I think that's
absolutely
important. Yep. So, Jill, I'm sure you have a thought around the idea of data transparency, and perhaps you have some examples of how countries, because you've worked in many countries, you might have some examples of how different countries do it. And I do note that we do have a couple of international visitors on the call today. And so if perhaps you'd like to share what's happening in the international world in terms of, is there a role model out there? Is there a quick fix and something that we could do right away that would help us get a better understanding underway?
So I guess we've just talked a bit about smart meter data, which is customer data. So you do have to be careful how you use customer data. And here in Australia, we've made that incredibly complicated by, as Alex said, contracting meters out to competitive companies. And someone asked, how much data do you need? Well, Victoria has 100% smart meter penetration, and one of the Victorian networks has identified that you probably only need 15% penetration for a DNSP to get the voltage data or the technical data that it's needed. And I want to draw the distinction between technical network data, which can come from a smart meter, and consumption data, which is customer usage, which is not necessarily something that we'd want to share publicly. But there's an ongoing consultation here in Australia to figure out how we're going to use data. And in Australia, we have a presumed confidential approach, which means networks, metering providers, retailers, it's all their data, not necessarily the customer's data. This is even with the consumer data right. However, in the UK, they've adopted an approach of presumed open for all network, sort of the technical network data, the physical network data, and networks are required by the regulator and their license conditions to make that data publicly available, because this allows academics, it allows people with really smart ideas to come up with new innovative ways of doing things. And that's not necessarily the network's role. The network's role in a regulated sense is to keep the electrons flowing. So yeah, it would be nice to see a presumed open approach. And I know we've been having some conversation in the chat about open systems. The UK hasn't found that to be a security problem. It's helping people identify where perhaps you can use demand side response services instead of investing in new poles and wires. So reducing the costs of running the network. So that's good for customers, good for everyone.
What about real-time data? I mean, for climate, as a meteorologist, have we got what we need coming in through our system? Are we connecting climate and weather data and optimizing that part of the puzzle?
So there's two, I suppose there's the operational weather data, which I think networks are reasonably well patched into. I'd like to see more, I'd like to see networks be more prepared on a seasonal basis. So we know we've got an El Nino probably coming in spring. That probably means we're going to have a higher bushfire risk. So networks in those high risk areas could already be thinking about spares and what they're going to need in case there are the bushfires that we've had before. In terms of climate data, I am very, very frustrated that our infrastructure providers have to go out and get individually a consultant to help them with climate projections every single time. That's costly, and I'd like to see, as they've done in other countries, uniform projections data so that we all are looking at the same data. We have a problem here in Australia where a network might say, I see this big risk here, go to the regulator and say, please, can I spend this money to make my network resilient? And the regulator says, well, we don't agree with your climate projections. We don't think it's going to be as bad as you think. But if we were all looking at the same climate projections, we would have a good understanding of climate risk, and we wouldn't have to each go out and pay hundreds of millions of dollars to get our own projections. We'd all be using the same data, which I think is really critical.
So is that at the hyper-local level, or are we looking at the big full country national level?
So I guess climate models, global climate models are typically on roughly 100 kilometre by 100 kilometre grid scale. That's not very helpful if you're looking at transmission towers on a 400 to 500 metre span. You want much more detail. We're not able as climate modelers to get down to that sort of degree of accuracy, but you can downscale those 100 by 100 grids to 50 kilometre grids or 5 kilometre grids. And that gives you much more, it gives you information. It's a bit like saying, I've got a single point for a 100 kilometre grid and then kind of breaking it up and trying to smear it out over that to get more detail. But topography is really critical in climate change. So if you overlay the topography on the climate data, you get a much richer data set, which gives you a sort of more local. So yes, you do need to have more local information. And for instance, Victoria and I think Tasmania have their own downscaled data for their state, which everyone could use, but not all of the states have prepared, a regional climate projection future.
It's important to project for the future. We need to be prepared. You can't find out about it now when it's happening now. Everything we're talking about is being prepared. Peter Stegina is interested in the risk due to high temperatures and the correlation you mentioned, Jill, about the loss of electricity and potentially, deaths and that might happen. Is there some way that we can address that?
So I guess it's very clear that some governments have specifically prevented the turning off of electricity networks for just this risk. So obviously, there are many ways to start a bushfire, the most common being a lightning strike. But unfortunately, electrical networks, when they're damaged, cause sparks and can ignite a bushfire. So one option is on a high risk day, just turn them off, have no electricity, but that then exposes particularly people, as Soraya said, in rural areas, to not having air conditioning, not being able to pump water to drink, to feed stock, to fight fires. We also had a question about EVs. So one approach is to think local. So there's a lot of interest in microgrids, but microgrids are highly complex. They feature a battery and renewable generation, and we all know that a battery doesn't last forever. So you've got to try and manage a battery. A community has to manage a battery, and that means making difficult social and equity decisions about who you're going to give the electricity to within the cycle of charging that battery. If you set up your rooftop solar PV system correctly, and most people don't know this, most people are horrified to discover that when there's a power outage, their rooftop solar disconnects and doesn't work, but you can set it up with the appropriate inverter or with a small battery so that it does work when there's no electricity network. And that's for very good safety reasons. You don't want no network and potentially generation flowing onto that network. You have to protect your lines people. And hearteningly, there's been a recent study from the University of New South Wales on resilience for communities, and they've shown that the bushfires of 2019, 2020, the smoke was if you set up your rooftop solar PV for winter, then you're still generating enough electricity in summer to meet your routine demand. So even if it is smoky, so I think it's a combination, and there are some really great examples. Borley, New South Wales, and Endeavour, they have a microgrid, but that's like everybody. The community is sharing their solar, their batteries, of the big community batteries. So it's but it's very difficult, very bespoke. Each community is going to need a different approach. You can do it yourself. But yeah, how are we going to manage those batteries, keeping them charged?
So it's battery storage, I guess. What kind of battery storage are you thinking that needs to underpin? I mean, what is it, a number of hours, or, will our current batteries, lithium batteries, et cetera, do they do the job, or what's your opinion on that?
So I have worked in energy storage. There are a variety of battery chemistries. So lead acid, lithium ion, we're having a bit of a love-in with lithium ion at the moment. So everyone wants lithium ion, and that's the ones we're most familiar with our phones and our computers, and they're the ones that are in EVs, and they tend to be the ones in home batteries or community batteries. Yeah, but it's always very difficult to right size a battery for what, we have EVs and range anxiety. How do you know that you've got enough electricity in your battery to get from A to B, and is there a charging station? It will be the same. You can pre-charge your battery or the community battery ahead of an event. So this is the readiness bit, but depending on how long the outage is, you may not be able to charge it from the grid. You may be able to charge it from local generation. But yeah, it's a careful balance getting that right and understand. I guess we've been talking about data, and one of the key things is knowing how much, as a household, perhaps as a community, how much energy you use on average. What is your essential load versus general load and how much would you need? And that's how you size it. But in order to make that decision, you've got to have, data on how much electricity you use, how much your fridge uses, and so on.
So I know I'm spending a little time with you, Jill, but there's lots of questions for you in the chat here. So I just want to just ask one more and then switch over to the other part of the team. But there's a question about the data resilience from Rob Ross here. And he talks about the computer modeling capability that we have. And was that helpful in determining what was happening, the influence of that the Tonga volcano, and have we got a picture developing around that issue because of the data modeling?
Yeah, so global climate modelers were straight off the bat and into their models as soon as that happened. And I think within 6 months, we've had a series of scientific papers published on the climate consequences. Obviously, it's always hard to attribute, say, the fires in Canada to particular events, or the low ice in Antarctica and the North Pole. It's clear that they're related to climate change, but it certainly looks like this single event, the eruption of the Tongan volcano, has perhaps is enhancing the warming for this year. I guess when Pinatubo erupted in 1991, climate modelers again were straight off the bat into what those impacts might be, and that was a cooling impact. But eventually we kind of came back to the, I'm going to say, new normal, or the sort of kind of increasing trend. So if you like, this is what we call interannual variability. It'll take a while for this to settle down, but maybe it will. The other thing is we don't know whether 2023, the things we're seeing, whether we've gone over a tipping point in our climate system, because those tipping points do exist. And so we have to wait and see. That's the problem. The more we wait and see, the longer it takes.
Right. We need to have action here, and we need to have informed action, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of questions about bushfires, but I'm going to just move over to one of the other compelling questions that we all see is how we are going to skill up for this, and how are we going to do it in a 4-year time frame. I mean, it's not just about, can we do things the same as we have in the past? It's how can we create a whole new urgency for training people. So you mentioned the need for these new skills. Why don't we start with you, and you can start to talk about what's your ideas. Obviously, CSIRO has a big part to play in how we develop our skills for the future. What's your view on how, can we get the people we need for this?
Yeah, I think it is like what we need is like, I think there's a lot of things that is happening in very isolation, and currently there's kind of like, it is not like I think previously we say about it like Jill clearly mentioned that there are lots of things happening in isolation, and everybody's doing the same thing, trying to do the same thing. Sometimes it's not coordinated. So how do the coordination in across the whole country in terms of the skill force, data sharing, or even the prediction, modeling, everything, like it's kind of like you don't need to do the same thing again and again, right? So that's the kind of like the national level coordination is need to be happen. And in terms of the skill set, now we kind of like we are going in a very I may be wrong here, but I think Alex may have a say here, because what we are doing is now currently we are having this new generation of graduates coming from the university. They are more about the technology savvy. They are probably the intersection of the ICT and the engineering, but we still need the people who can maintain those legacy systems, right? We are going to have a legacy system. We are not going to transition in 4 years. We are not going to have a completely new system. That's not going to happen. We need those engineers who can work on those legacy systems, and that particular skill set we are losing very rapidly, because we are getting the new skill set, but we are losing that skill set.
That's an interesting point of view. I never thought of that.
And so because it's a legacy, always legacy. When you look at the Y2K problem, suddenly everybody started looking at the programmer, which we lost those programmers programming COBOL, but we need a COBOL programmer because everybody knows Java and C++ into 1999, and COBOL programmer is on high demand because everybody need to look at all those systems and make sure that Y2K problem is solved. Right now, here we are looking at once we digitally transform, we are still going to have the legacy system, and we still need the people who are going to work on those legacy systems. And when I'm talking about the skill set, I'm in favor of the modern skill set, but I'm also want to make sure that we have the right skill set for the system we have. That's a very different way. That's like otherwise it is like our remote area or rural area will never have a skill set they need, and that's kind of like Alex may
we
have
have to
more
have
say.
the old and the new developing together, but also kind of we have some things that are completely new that people will have to develop and learn about at the same time.
Perhaps if I could,
course.
sort of complement the answer. So, I mean,
Yes.
the reality is we have an existing system with existing resources. A lot of in the utility industry, there's a lot of electrical fitters who have got basic electrical skills, but they themselves need to be transformed to upskill to be able to address the new communications area, the new control systems area, and work in parallel. I mean, a recent example, I've had an electrician come to my place, and he didn't necessarily have the full skills necessary to handle the telephone system, and yet you'd expect that to be integrated in that area. So having those, unfortunately, we've our whole technical training area at the technologist level and the trades level is still rather anachronistic, and we haven't used the opportunities early, say 10 years ago, to start training all of our skills force to be working with both the legacy systems and the new technologies that are coming forward. So now there's a need for an intense program to be occurring of retraining, upskilling, and making those people who are already in the workforce able to take on the challenges in a confident way, so that we don't have to have a just completely new generation of people without those legacy system backgrounds. So it's a combination of both, but the existing workforce is a huge one, and it really requires concerted effort, and both industry and the education sector and government need to work together in terms of achieving that.
Excellent. And working together isn't that easy, right? So
Right.
it's always a bit of a challenge, but that's the reason why we're here at the Pearcey Foundation.
I think one of the things I can give the real kind of practical example is like that we have this NRMA or equivalent in all the other state about the roadside assistance, right? And if you have an electric vehicle, the only thing they can do is you go back to your kind of like if you look at the old vehicle, they can fix it there on the road basically, and they can make you drive, right? But the new vehicle, all the electronic vehicle, they will just say that it doesn't work. I can do is only towing. Basically, that's the whole. So it's a very practical scenario, and I have encountered that. So it's kind of like we don't have even those workforce need to how to make them work with the car we used to have and the car we are having now, right? It doesn't have that workforce.
Oh, this is challenging. I want to just take that idea of electric vehicles just for the last 2 minutes. And Jill, there was quite a few discussions about electric vehicles and as ambulances and fire and, all of those things that are going to be challenged because of the power supply. Can you just give us a bit of color on that before we finish up?
So I'm not an expert on how we're going to get to be fully resilient when everything is electrified. That's going to be a huge challenge. And I guess there's been a lot of work out of the 2019, 2025s, where people have gone and bought diesel gensets because that's the small diesel gensets, because that's the only way they can see that they can have a resilient electricity supply. And these are the challenges that we have to face. So yeah, how are you going to charge your electric fire engine when there's a bushfire, or your electric fire engines? And that means, you could have a really big battery. This is what they do in the UK at motorway service stations, is because the network is weak. They have a very large battery located at the service station, off which the little chargers operate, so that overnight they can charge up that big battery, and then there's enough in there to charge all the EVs coming through. So I think we're going to have to look at, things like that. We also have to look at not just batteries. There was a question earlier about battery energy systems for long duration electricity storage. We're going to have to look at pumped hydro and other newer technologies to give us that longer duration, or to support us when we can't use sun and wind. I see Jeremy's put a comment in there about a diesel generator being pulled by a Tesla, but that is in Western Australia. We're looking at their EV highway, and there was a very real risk that a battery charger in the middle of nowhere was actually going to, you'd plug in your EV and then you'd hear this putter putter and a big blast of black smoke as the diesel genset started up, because that was the only cost-effective way to get electricity to the middle of nowhere. So it is a big challenge, and it's not one we've properly resolved yet. So it's something that we do have to think about as we electrify. We kind of put all our eggs in the electricity basket, whereas at the moment we've got lots of different options.
Okay, so we're real, gosh, the time's gone so quickly, and I'm really enjoying this conversation. But could I just have one sentence or one phrase from each of you? What is the key thing? What's one key thing? I mean, I know that this is a very complex problem, but what's one key thing that we could all do to get this show on the road, to get all, innovation started here? Alex, what's your thought?
Oh, look, the overall pervading issue is knowledge and data. So the combination of knowledge of our employees and they have a visibility of a network will drive us into the future.
Excellent. Love to have that. So yeah, your thoughts?
I think I'll say that sharing and coordination. So sharing the knowledge and data, and then the coordination of our approach. I think that the two things, if we do that, probably we will reach there very safe and secure way.
Excellent. And Jill, your final thoughts?
So there are a lot of smart people in Australia, and I think if we could share data openly, where we can do that safely and it doesn't breach any confidentiality, there are going to be a lot of smart people that can come up with the smart solutions, the innovative approaches that we're going to need for the future. So I'd like to see us be much more open, particularly around physical network data.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your time today. And thank you for all of the attendees for giving a long stream of wonderful questions. And I really look forward to our next session, which our next session is actually a hybrid session that's going to be at ACS, and that will be at early in September. So look out for that one. All of the presentations you heard today will be on the Pearcey website within a short period of time. So please check in there, and thank you for joining us today. Bye now.
Thank you.